Good morning. For the fifth and final day of our September plenary sessions. Good morning from here. I know it's afternoon for some, early morning for others, late night for others. It's been a productive week. So two things today. The first one is more administrative minutes from the June and July meetings, and then we'll turn to 600. I mentioned this earlier in the week. Imran sends his apologies for today. Kumu, his TA, will participate when Imran has some remarks to make on the turnaround document. So the first thing is the minutes, the revised minutes were posted yesterday, both in clean and track changes form. I would like to approve them together, and if it's possible, does anyone object to their approval? Raise their hand. Okay, so I'm reading that as a sign of support for both. If no hands are raised in the next minute or so, for maybe 20 seconds, then I will take the 2 minutes as approved. Philly, did you want to come in?
No, that's fine, Tom. That will be
okay. Let it know for the record, the minutes as posted yesterday on the public website for June and July have been approved. Okay, so we're gonna turn our attention to the turnaround drafting put forward by the 600 task force. Note that it is a virtual environment. This is when it's most challenging to coordinate and amongst the task force members. I appreciate everyone doing the work, but with that in mind, if task force members, as appropriate, want to jump in, please feel free to into this discussion. You're not required to be silent. The real goal today is maybe not pure finalization of drafting. Obviously, we have to December for that, but a real sense of direction on these few topics that the task force is hitting the mark, so they could go away and keep refining. The other thing I would say is that the topics that were discussed throughout the week but not brought back, the task force, of course, will still appreciate any drafted suggestions that would be made offline. So again, remember, December's the approval for this, but we're trying on these issues, which were the major ones raised throughout the week, to get clear direction for the task force going forward. The only other thing is remember, if there's further clarification too, we always, on issues of intent, we have the bases in our first time application as well. So Len, good morning. I guess it's late, sometime during the night where you are. Welcome and thank you for all your efforts on the behalf of the 600 task force. I turn it to you.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I'm trying a different internet connection today. Hopefully won't be any interruptions today. Thank you, Tom, and especially thank the task force. The task force has been working nonstop behind the scene, and there were a lot of people having sleepless nights. So I really appreciate my task force. So, but I think Tom said is in a virtual environment, it's been challenging. So so I welcome my task force to come in during the discussion, as well as Willie, Dan, and Jasper as well. They spent a lot of time behind the scene. We had a number of discussions and tried to refine the draft you've been seeing since lunchtime yesterday. So I think Tom said very well outlined the goal. I think because of limited time, so we are turning around on specific paragraph for today's discussions, and the goal is clearly getting as much comments from you as clear as possible, so so we can at least get some direction in terms of the wordings in those particular paragraphs we're going to discuss today. And again, thank you very much for all the offline comments before the meeting. So those ones we will still continue to work through. So we will after this meeting, during our task force meeting, we'll go through all our offline comments by the full task force. So thank you for that. Next slide, please. So we're going to focus on the first part today is on paragraph, the tongue twisting paragraph, the AAAA paragraph, the statutory audits. So the board asked the task force to clarify this particular paragraph regarding the audits of component financial statement that may have already been completed. But also, I think based on the discussion on Monday is that there might be audits that's been performing at the same time concurrently. That's the word used in the old draft during the group audit. So we need to clarify the intent to cover both. So the task force considered different options for providing guidance on the completed audits of component financial statement and what those guidance might be. So concluded that the proposed wordings, what you have seen yesterday, this morning, is the most appropriate approach in the standard, because it acknowledges that the audit work on component financial statement can be used and provides a hook for implementation guidance we plan to be issued later. So the group auditor may be able to use the audit work on component financial statement, provided that group auditor is satisfied that much work is appropriate for group audit's purpose. So similar wording was actually previously used in the ED, paragraph A130 in the exposure draft. So more importantly, the requirements of ISA 600 revised, applied. I think that's, if you see the redraft, it will focus on all the ISAs applied, or all the requirements ISA apply, including those relating to DSR. So task force discussed that for completed audits, the nature of the DSR may change, but the general principle of sufficient appropriate involvement by the group auditor still applies. Therefore, there still is a need for appropriate communication with the component auditor and appropriate review of the component auditor's work and documentation, depending on the facts and circumstances on how that audit work is proposed to be used as audit evidence by the group auditor. So the task force, intended, as I said, provide additional guidance in this area as part of the implementation guidance once the standards is finalized. Next slide, please. So Tom, so this one is one particular paragraph, 8AAA. And based on my explanation in terms of task force thinking and the reason for some of the wording changes, I think the task force and the staff are happy to take comments at this point.
Thank you. Requirement 3C and A8AA. Fernando?
Thanks, Tom. Glenn, I'd like the paragraph, the changes. I think it reflects the options that we see in practice. We just sent a couple of minor editorials for a little bit of clarification, but in general terms, I support what you have been presenting. Thanks.
Thanks. Sue?
Thanks, Len. And I also feel that the structure and the kind of analysis is certainly moving in the right direction. I have also sent some suggestions. The main piece is around the first couple of sentences, because it talks there about the component auditor. And I wonder at that stage whether it's actually been determined that this is a component auditor, because the other auditor only becomes a component auditor when the group auditor requests them to perform work. And so I think possibly the first two sentences are talking about when there is another auditor involved, as opposed to necessarily when that decision has been taken. But I think that can probably be addressed by some editorial work. So thanks for the work there.
Okay, Julie?
Same for me. Then I was one of the ones that raised this paragraph, and I think what the task force has done addresses my concern. I do have a couple of little things for the task force maybe to consider from a drafting perspective, and I can send those through, but I was happy with your changes.
Thank you. Chun-Wei?
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to Len, task force, and all the staff involved in this. I'm generally supportive of the edits that have been made. I like the reinstatement of the sentence, provided group audit is satisfied that such work is appropriate for purpose of the group audit. I think this is the most crucial sentence, together with the last sentence, which is the bit about the DSR. And I just wonder if combining them at the end will make it more prominent. And so I have some editorial suggestion to that. The other bit is, the sentence about how the component auditors may be able to use the work performed for the purpose of the group audit for their statutory audit. I think it's a helpful reminder, but just don't think that is the most important piece of message in the context of 600. So I was just wondering if we want to streamline this and just to really bring out the most important bits, whether losing that sentence is helpful. So I have some editorial suggestion to this paragraph, which I'll send through. Thanks.
Okay. Wendy?
Good morning, good evening, good day. Len, I don't know how you turn this around so quickly. Anyway, I believe the spirit of what we were talking about has completely been addressed. My only recommendation is back to your prior slide. The way that it's laid out in almost bullet points might make it cleaner and clearer for the practitioner to be able to understand the paragraph. Otherwise, I just had some editorials as well, which I will send through. Thank you.
Okay. Diane?
Thank you, Len and the team. Great job turning this around, and I was fine with the revisions as is. Thank you.
Thanks. Kaiue?
Thanks, Tom. Good afternoon. I have read this paragraph very intensively, and I believe the wording of the task force reflects our discussion on the board very correctly, and is, in my view, I'm deeply convinced in the public interest. Thanks.
Okay. So amongst the commentators, and I assume if you didn't raise your hand, you're supportive, but express support for the intent. The only thing that gives me a little bit pause, I don't know if we need to raise a little bit more, is Sue, your drafted point seemed slightly maybe more than editorial, and so there's no confusion here. I don't know if there's a specific thing you want to raise with the board for discussion, or if it's just editorial, then you can send it to the task force.
I've sent a suggestion to the task force, Tom, but I think it goes back to the point that I raised, I've lost track of days, earlier in the week, around the position where it hasn't been decided at that point whether another auditor is a component auditor or not. And I had quite a long conversation with Len and Dan and Jasper at the beginning of the week around some of that. And I think that's one of the points that Len has sort of emailed me separately to say that they're still kind of thinking through.
Okay. Eda?
Yes, thank you, Tom. Just in reaction to Sue's question on whether they are component auditors or not. And then Sue is right that they start off as another auditor, but at a certain point in time, if the group auditor wants to use some of that work, they become a component auditor. Because they will be requested to report and either leverage some of the work that they performed or not. And I would suggest they do. But at that particular point in time, they are a component auditor. So I don't see an issue with using component auditor at this particular point in time, because if the group auditor is going to use that work, they are a component auditor because they will be operating under the request of the group auditor.
I guess, Mike, I'm going to channel a regulatory perspective here. I guess my fear a little bit is that if we introduce another category, there is a risk that there could be a loophole of the DSR, perceived loophole of the DSR requirements, right, as it relates. And I think that's the big thing which the task force is trying to grapple with. So, and Josephine had her hand raised and then dropped it as soon as I said it. I don't know, is that what you were going to come to say, Josephine, or something?
Yeah. No, that's quite right. And, I was, first of all, Ado set it up incredibly well. That's spot on. I recognize that where it sits physically in the standard, I can understand Sue's point that you haven't actually got to the point where you've made that decision yet. But certainly, if you're using that work, then therefore, by implication, you have instructed, and therefore that is a component auditor, and of course the requirements of the ISA apply. And one of the points to your point about regulation is that one of the issues that we were really trying to address as part of this project is this sufficient involvement piece as well. And so it all fits with that. Thank you, Tom.
Any reactions to that?
So I'm happy for the task force to take it away. As I say, we had a long conversation with Len and Dan and Jasper. And I think what I'm hearing from Josephine and Ado is slightly different to what we talked about, and particularly, because this is also in this position where it moves into equity investments as well, that there may be occasions where audited financial statements provide the evidence that's needed. But Tom, I'm happy for the task force to take it away. I can see Josephine smiling and shaking her head, so we may have differences of opinion in any event. Okay. I think the point has been aired. I think they've probably got what they need, and I'm happy to get on the call and discuss further if that helps.
Okay, Len, I think you got clarity from the board and a strong sense of the board that we're headed in the right direction, and the point that's been aired has been aired, and you see the flip side to it now too. Len, I turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for Edo and Josephine for coming. This is the area that we did spend a lot of time on, and so I'm happy that Sue came in with additional explanation from your perspective. Thank you for that. I will move to the next slide, please. Next slide will be dealing with the second topic. Those will be dealing with the equity accounted investment. This is one of the area we spoke in length on Monday. So based on the input and discussion on Monday, we added linkage to guidance on how to overcome restrictions on access to component auditors documentation. So that's in paragraph 828. So we split out the consideration when the auditor can overcome restriction. That's paragraph 829. And when the auditors cannot overcome restrictions related to equity investment. So that's in paragraph 829A. So the reason we split that is we clarify what the auditors can do when there are restrictions. Sometimes they can overcome those issues by applying, pressure on the management or other means. Sometimes they cannot overcome those restrictions. So then you look for other information, right? So focus on the information that can be obtained and not on sufficient, appropriate other evidence. So the task force view is that this clarifies the message on equity accounted investments. So in the paragraphs you saw, we further clarified that the auditor's professional judgment, whether restriction can be overcome, depends on particularly on assessed risks of material misstatement and other sources of information that may collaborate or otherwise contribute to all the evidence obtained. So it depends on the facts and circumstances. What you need to overcome restrictions, a task force overview that particularly important to look at risk of material misstatements. So the task force discussed, we also, as part of preparation in terms of thinking ahead, task force discussed adding specific guidance on use of audited financial statement of investees and consideration for determining the extent to which additional guidance is needed to provide sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Similar to the PCAOB guidance, some of the offline comments we did receive before this board meeting is some people suggest we look into the PCAOB standards. Well, the task force decided not to add anything specific guidance, but in the information gathering stage, we were informed that the audited financial statement alone is not sufficient, that we had to raise the bar. So in the end, the risk of material misstatement drives the auditor's actions and therefore added the reference to consider assess of risk of material misstatement. So those ones, so I basically explained task force thinking after Monday's discussions. And also that's how we suggested those changes in those particular paragraphs. Next slide, please. So for this area, those paragraphs I mentioned cover from paragraph 827 to 830. Those material required application material related to requirement 16. So Tom, probably a good time for board's input.
Not only a good time, it's the only time for a board is on this topic with equity accounted investments, at least at this plenary session. Yeah. Okay, any comments on equity accounted investments and the requirement related application material? Julie.
And Len, you'll remember I struggled with these paragraphs earlier in the week, and I really compliment the task force and you on what you've done here. I really, other than one minor editorial comment, I had nothing here. I was happy with what you've done. Thank you.
Thank you. Diane?
Len, my comment is in A29, third bullet, where you talk about the potential that maybe you can contact somebody on the board or those charged with governance to get some additional information. I would just ask you to go back and look at that just one more time. When I read it, I get a little concerned that it implies that you can have some sort of conversation to get you, and that conversation is going to get you sufficient audit evidence. And I don't want to have auditing by inquiry. So maybe if you could just go back and tighten that up just a little bit to be crystal clear that you may have a discussion to obtain appropriate audit evidence, but not to imply that the discussion alone will get you what you need. That's my only caution on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Roger.
I think this is an improvement, Len. The one point I've got for consideration is the first bullet point of A29, where the group auditor may request group management or those charged with governance. This is under 16, where the group engagement partner has concluded that group management cannot provide that information. So I don't know that there's going to be much benefit in going to group management if we've already made that conclusion. It's for consideration. It just doesn't seem like it would be beneficial. I understand those charged with governance, but it doesn't seem to be beneficial if that conclusion's already been made. For your consideration.
Thank you, Roger. Fernando.
Thanks, Tom. Len, I also support the changes. I think it flows much better. I have to admit that I still need to read probably twice the paragraphs to get the whole concept, but in general terms, at the end, I think it makes sense. Thanks.
Thank you. Sue?
Yeah, thanks. And I also feel that this is clearer and better structured. The only point I had was actually the one I raised earlier in the week, and it's similar to Diane's. It's the last point, the last bullet of A29, where we're talking about somebody who is appointed into the equity investment board and clarifying what role it is we're talking about. I think I said previously, it's I think we could be asking them to potentially breach confidentiality and so on. So I think if we could look at that section, that would be helpful.
Thank you. Wendy?
Thanks, Tom. I have the same concern with the third bullet of A29, so hoping we can clarify exactly what the intent is there and who's supposed to speak to who and who's responsible for that conversation and what actually we're going to get out of that conversation. And then I have a continuing point in A30, which everybody else seems to understand, but I'm not. When the group auditor cannot overcome restrictions, communicating the restrictions to the group auditor's firm, I'm just not sure that what that adds, or can that just be stricken, or should it say communicating the restrictions to appropriate parties? I don't know. I'm just unclear on what the intent is there. And if I remove it, I think I'm better understanding A30. Thank you.
Thank you. Chong-Wei?
Thank you. Well, the key thing I sort of struggle a little bit is the distinction between A29 and A29A. I think in both cases, there is a restriction, you're trying to overcome it, and then you're just trying to get sufficient appropriate evidence either way. So I think, for example, the question that I think Roger asked may also point to the potential confusion actually. And I just wonder whether the distinction is all that necessary, or whether we can just collapse it into one paragraph. Other than that, I'm happy with the edits that have been made. Thanks.
Okay. Len, my read of everyone is that there's real support for the direction that you're headed in on these paragraphs. Some refinements, clarity around A29, A29A, A30 that could be worked, but I have no fear about that you could overcome those.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I think the consistent comments, I think on the first bullet and the third bullet of A29 we'll definitely take it back to the task force and take a look. On A30, I think that paragraph's been there for a while, and I think the purpose is if you cannot overcome restriction, I think from a group auditor perspective, you need to inform the firm, right? Into the firm and see what more you can do. So that's why the paragraph is in there. But Wendy, if I I'm trying to understand your question is you feel that step is not necessary, or there has to be some communication when there's a restriction from engagement to the firm. So maybe just further clarify your concern is.
I'm just not. So it's a one-way communication. I'm not. Is it just, dear national office, I have a problem? Like, what's supposed to? I'm not sure that the bullet then addresses it. I'm not sure where it goes. That's really, I'm just trying to figure out, okay, I'm the group auditor, I'm the partner. What, dear national office, I have a problem. What do I expect to happen from that?
So it's expectation from a firm once you communicate the restrictions. Is that your point?
Yeah, because the bullets don't really address the, the lead in, the bullets don't really address the point in the lead in.
Okay, thank you. I think that helped me to understand it. So we'll take a look at the task force on 8:30. But I think overall, I hear people are okay in terms of what we presented in 829, 829A, that whole section. I think there were a couple of comments, particularly on those in charge of governance and related to the first bullet and the third bullet that we need to work on. Is that, just want to make sure before we leave this section, that's the view of the board, at least directionally we're on track.
That was my interpretation, Len.
Okay.
Okay, so I think we're ready to move on to the next section.
Okay, so next section. So next section is that paragraph 40, the famous paragraph 45A. I think on Tuesday when I talk about the 45A, I know we focus on weather and to the extent, but it's very important. I think I said on Tuesday, when you look at 45A, is we need to look at all the requirements in some of the foundational standards, number one. I think on Tuesday discussion, the direction we got from the board is we need to make sure the intent is clear, and what's being included in 45A is incremental, and also make it's a positive determination. What else do you need to review? So based on that, Dan and Jasper spent our time creating this this chart. So it's important to highlight that the linkage to ISO 220, the key foundational standards, and also linkage between the specific paragraph in 220 and 600, how that link together. And also it's important to point back to ISQ1, right? ISQ1, system of quality management in terms of review of work performed by less engaging team members. So that concept's there. Then further guidance in ISO 220 in terms of requirement and a number of patient materials in our sessions. Then the DSR portion, very important. We specify that in the issues paper already, but if you look at the third bullets in the middle of that reverse triangle, those paragraph reference 26C, 38, 39, we continue to emphasize it's a total package in terms of what needs to be reviewed. Then at the end, when we get to 45A, determine the need to review additional component audit documentation in concluding on a group audit. So this is the area that the message we've been try to address in the issues paper and also in the draft standards presented for this board meeting. So the direction we heard is make sure that people understand, make sure that that intent is clear, and also making sure that when we deal with 45A is after you consider all the core requirement in 220, starting with ISQ1, 220, and particularly those requirement in paragraph 29 through 31 in ISO 220, and how that link in a group audit situation in ISO 600. So the point is never about 45A in isolation, right? So that's the goal we try to achieve. So so from at least from Tuesday's discussion, the board at least noted agreement with the task force intent with paragraph 45A and the linkage to all the requirement in ISA 220 revised. So the ask from Tuesday is to give more thoughts to clarify the interrelationship of the relevant requirements in paragraphs in ISA 220. So that chart hopefully give you a better understanding that interrelationship. So in terms of what we have done in those paragraphs, we included a turnaround documents in the relevant paragraph to address engagement performance requirement in ISA 220 revised. So we started with the group engagement partners responsibility for the nature, timing, extent of DSR. So that's in paragraph 23 and the paragraph A48A to A52X. So the second thing we did was we revised A48A and A49 to strengthen the linkage to ISA 220, paragraph 29 to 30 I mentioned earlier. So we'll move some of the wording up, as the task force view was that the link to engagement performance requirement in ISA 220 is better made in paragraph 23 of the standards. So you can see on the reverse triangle, the paragraph 23 that link to paragraph 29 of 220. So
I think we need to get to the next slide,
okay.
right?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So people could
Move
see
to
it.
the next. Yeah, move to the next slides. Sorry, thank you, Tom. So revise the wording in A49 to address comments from a board member that group engagement partner is required to take responsibility and therefore only assign procedures, tasks, or action to others to help the group engagement partner fulfill that requirement. And we also revised the bullet in A51 in response to board's comments. In particular, revised the fourth bullet because it was noted that the inability to transfer audit documentation out of the jurisdiction does not automatically lead to more extensive DSR. Wording was changed to indicate the nature of the review may be different, consistent with paragraph A130. So we added paragraph A52X to respond to board comment that there should be a direct reference to paragraph 31 of ISA 220 revised. I think that was a comment from Lynn at the meeting on Tuesday. So we changed the leading wording to 45A to link to the required evaluation in paragraph 45 small b. So paragraph 45 and 45A both follow from the communication requested from component auditors in paragraph 44. So paragraph 45 little b requires an evaluation of whether the communication from component auditors are adequate, which then leads to the required determination in 45A about whether and to the extent to which additional component audit documentation needs to be reviewed. So let me just repeat that because this is one that focus on what we discussed on Tuesday, the whether to the extent. So we change the leading wording to 45A to link to required evaluations in paragraph 45B, little b. So paragraph 45 and 45A both follow on from communication requested from component auditors in paragraph 44. I think Diane made that point that was well received on Tuesday. So paragraph 45 little b requires an evaluation of whether the communication from component auditors are adequate, which then lead to the required determination in 45A about whether and the extent to which additional component audit documentation needs to be reviewed. So just to emphasize what we've done based on our discussion and board's feedback on Tuesday. Then we go to the application material. We added A112X to link back to specific requirement for group engagement partners regarding DSR and the review of specific audit documentation in accordance with ISO 220 paragraph 31, which that was addressing Lynn's comment. Then we revised 8112B to be more clearly indicate that determination in paragraph 45A takes into account that group engagement team, group engagement partner have learned from ongoing DSR and review of component audit documentation done to fulfill other requirements of the standards and paragraph 31 of ISO 220. So I've been repeating paragraph 31 ISO 220 multiple times. That's a linkage that the board has asked to consider. So we delete the bullets on review performed by component auditor reviewer as DSR, and communication are primary considerations. On A1113, we included reference to A51 here, as that paragraph provides guidance for tailoring the nature, time, extent of DSR. And the task force spent a lot of time and noted that the first bullet of A51 relates to assess risk of material misstatement. So we revise in this paragraph and relate to assess risk of material, my apology, a lot of words here. So make some revision there, and some of the wording are close to ISQ1 requirement that DSR is planned and performed on the basis that the work performed by less experienced engagement team members is directed, supervised, and reviewed by more experienced engagement team members. So I noticed a lot of changes, and thank you very much for being patient with me to go through those changes. If that areas that's not clear based on your reading of those revised paragraphs, we're happy to explain more in detail. But Tom, there was just a number of changes based on what we heard on Tuesday, and we're now happy to take comments at this point.
Okay.
Next slide, please.
So a number of changes. This all stems from our discussion of 45A, but again, not surprisingly, as the point was being made, it's supplemental on other work. So a lot of work making sure that people understood those linkages and the building up. And I thought that diagram was very useful. So thank you, task force, and I guess and team for putting that together. Any comments on what was proposed here? Lynn.
Good evening, everybody. And I'd like to thank the task force and the staff. I suspect you haven't had very much sleep in the time between where we last talked and this call. So really appreciate the efforts and all the changes you've made. This is the first time I've spoken. Just to put it on the record, I do support the changes you made on the first two topics that we talked about. In terms of this item, I'm pleased to see the expanded application material around 23, and I particularly like A52X. I paused on it whether it was in the right place, but after a quick conversation with Dan, it is actually the last point in terms of documentation and links into 45A. So I became happy and comfortable with that. In 45A, I do like the introductory words now. I think it is clearer and easier. And I also like the use of the additional audit documentation. So it's additional to what you have to do under 220. Finally, I too like that diagram, and don't lose it. I think it'd be really useful in first time implementation material. Those were all my comments, but thank you very much again, Len and team, for the excellent work you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Isabel.
Yes, hello everybody. Like Lynn, I had no comments on the first questions that were raised. On this specific section, I'm not questioning where we landed and the message we want to convey, which is clear. But I think these paragraphs are quite complex. And I fully acknowledge the complexity of having started by what we had and trying to add the other message we want to bring. But now it really looks like a treasure hunt, une chasse au trésor. Un jeu de piste, as we say in French, because you have a lot of cross-references. So you go to one paragraph and then you have a reference to another one. And so you go to 45A and they bring you to 45 little b, and then they bring you back to 44. And a lot of cross-references among all these paragraphs. And of course, they are really interlinked. But I think the outcome is really complex. So if we can still work on it to streamline, it would be really appreciated, because I fear that the people that will read it will get lost at some point and never find the treasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. Julie.
Thank you, Len, and I appreciate some of the changes you've made to some of these paragraphs as a result of our discussion earlier in the week. And my question really only deals with 45 big A. And I believe the intent and the direction the task force is taking is what we discussed. But I think the wording right now, as it stands in the lead into 45A, isn't quite right, because the determination you're making in 45A is not solely based on the evaluation from 45 little b. It's based on a number of things. And actually it's based on 45 big A, little b, little c, in combination with a whole lot of other things. So I'm concerned with the fact that now we say, based on the evaluation required by 45 little b, we're limiting that, because that's not the only thing you're considering in that requirement. If we want to still have the hook to 45 little b there, one option might be to have another, like if it's A, B, C, D, have a D, or put it first and say, based on, the evaluation as required in 45B would work better. I think versus what we have now, which is, I think, limiting the requirement and somewhat confusing. So that would be my suggestion on 45A. I didn't really have anything other that's substantial to raise. Thanks.
Thank you. Kuma?
Thank you, Tom. Good afternoon. And thank you for affording me the opportunity to speak on this item on Imran's behalf. He apologizes that he's unable to join us this afternoon. Imran acknowledges the change that the task force has proposed and thanks them for all the enhancements already discussed, which he generally agrees with. But he asked me to make this comment in relation to paragraph 45 big A. He's of the view that in an effort to address the conditionality involving the word whether, we have now introduced a cross-reference to 45 little b, which in turn references paragraph 44. This construction adds complexity and difficulty in understanding the requirement and does not resolve the conditionality. In fact, Imran says that it was not of the understanding previously that the determination in 45 big A hinged entirely on 45 little b. He thought that the auditor would make that determination in 45 big A based on everything that came before, including the whole of paragraph 45. Therefore, he unfortunately does not support this change and reiterates the need for the words whether to be deleted. Thank you.
In many ways, this is a similar comment to Julie's comment, as I understand. I would say on the issue of whether, we had quite substantial comment on that last discussion, and the translation issue is a serious issue associated with the removal of the word whether. And I just wonder, Len and task force, I know you struggled with this and trying to do something, is the better solution to go to the root cause, which is the introductory based on the evaluation required by 45B? Is there something more, some different way to articulate that to imply based upon all the other evaluations, right? Which means there's that requirement. And I don't know it's the by paragraph 45B that's really the issue where it's limited. I think that would address Imran's point maybe, but certainly would address Julie's point, and just keep that back in the mind. But I did want to remind the removal of whether did have serious implications in other jurisdictions that I don't think was consistent with the intent of the board either. Sachiko.
Thank you, Tom, and hello, everybody. And first of all, I really appreciate the task force's hard work. I know it must be very hard considering this virtual environment. Actually, I have two questions with regard to the intent of the changes. And one is the second bullet on paragraph A, 52. It's a very small one, but there is addition of audit in the second sentence, so the second bullet. I'm guessing perhaps it is just for consistency with other wordings in other paragraphs. However, if the intent is to require some review of the component auditor audit documentation in all the cases when considering the review of the component auditor's work, I disagree with the intent. I think review of the component auditor's work should also include review of other written communication, such as memorandum from the component auditor to the group auditor. I think my question is coming from my next question with regard to the paragraph 45A and A112 big B, particularly the wording additional in the first sentence of paragraph 45A and the wording added to the first bullet of A112 big B. On Tuesday, I know we discussed clarification about the flow of the requirement and the incremental nature of paragraph 45A, which I agree. And my question is the group auditor's review of the component auditor audit documentation in accordance with paragraph 45A additional to what? In my understanding, paragraph 45A is incremental to the group auditor's review of the component auditor's work that had been done so far. In some cases, before the group auditor makes determination in accordance with paragraph 45A, the group auditor may review parts of the component auditor audit documentation. In other cases, before the group auditor makes determination in accordance with paragraph 45A, the group auditor may only review other deliverable, which is written communication from the component auditor. I think it depends on the circumstances. And then I think paragraph 45A asks the group auditor to stand back as to whether review of the part of the component auditor audit documentation is necessary as an incremental review of the component auditor's work. That is my understanding. However, by changing to additional in 45A and by adding the last part to the first bullet on paragraph 8.112 big B, it seems to mean that paragraph 45A is incremental to the group auditor's review of the component auditor audit documentation that has already been done. If that is the case, it seems to imply that before the group auditor makes determination about whether, in accordance with paragraph 45A, the group auditor is already required to review component auditor audit documentation in all the cases, and therefore not reviewing any component auditor audit documentation in any circumstance is unacceptable in accordance with ISO 600. If it is the intent of this change, I strongly disagree with the direction because of the reason I stated on Tuesday. But if it is not the intent, I think some changes are needed to clarify my point. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Hachiko. It may be useful for you to share that in writing with the task force. There was a lot there.
Sorry,
maybe it's all the references, but I think the task force will need to see that in writing to make sure.
Yeah,
that they
happy
fully
to do
capture
that.
that. Okay, Roger.
Well, I was going to thank the task force. I thought the incremental nature came through much clearer here. So I thought the words were much better. And I think you're making it now clear so that people can make that determination and follow through. I really liked what we had. I do have the sympathy for Julie's comment, having been able to listen to her comment and the other Kaisers. There is more than just the paragraph 45B and then the referencing back. So to the extent to which you can pick that up, I think that would again help. Whether you even need that as to how it sits under 44, 45, etc. And then the incremental nature should come through very clearly as to what's done. So I like what you've done. I think there's just a little bit more work to try and make it clear. But congratulations in the short turnaround. So thank you.
Thank you. Sue.
Thanks, and I also feel there's been an awful lot here that has helped, and particularly the material around 45, 45A and so on. I felt was much improved. Like others, I found some of the discussion was a little bit complex, and the first thing I wrote down, Len, as you started talking us through it, was that diagram. I thought was brilliant. So please don't lose that. I can see that being really valuable in the implementation process. I had a couple of comments on the application material to 23. I've sent them through as well, but I think on A49, I was a little bit confused as to whether in that final sentence we were mixing up design supervision and review with performance of procedures, and actually I think I probably preferred what was there previously. And then in the addition of A52X, the new addition there, the shorthand that we're using, I think works fine in the diagram. I'm less convinced in the context of the application material, because it's sort of inferring that there are specific work papers that are set out in 220, and I don't think that's the case. I think 220 has 3 short categories of where the auditor would use judgment on what to review, and my preference would be to include those. It's not a lot more words, but I think it would be a lot clearer and would avoid giving the impression that there is a list. Thank you.
Thank you. Diane?
Was perfect timing, because I agree with Sue's comments on A52X. When I read it, it kind of hits you very hard and very, to me, sounds like you have to look at a list of work papers and all of those work papers, and that needs to be done by the group auditor. I think you could benefit, as Sue alluded to, listing out the types of things that are referenced in ISO 220 that should be reviewed, and also build into it how the review can be executed. In other words, some of that review responsibility can be given out through the assignment of tasks. So I think A52X is okay. I think it could benefit with a little softening or a little clarity or a little rounding out, so it doesn't hit you quite so hard. I also agree with Julie's comments, and I also agree with Isabel's comments that I think this section is so important, right? This is all about the extent of work paper review. Very, very important aspect. And I think right now it's a bit, I like the scavenger hunt, the trail of following along. And I think if you all could just take a step back, look at your diagram and see if there's a way that you can clarify the flow of these paragraphs so that it doesn't lose the practitioner. I mean, that's the worst thing that we can have happen, is that the practitioner doesn't quite understand what they're supposed to do, and something falls through the crack. And because it is such a critically important aspect of a group audit, so maybe look at how could you simplify it, how can you minimize the referencing, that might be helpful. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Fernando?
Thank you, Tom. Same as others, I like the changes. I like what is being proposed. I think it's quite simple to read this short paper and make the connections between the engagement performance and what happens in 45 and 45A. And I also agree with Isabel that when you have the whole standard, sometimes you get lost in the whole flow of the audit. But actually, the paper is really telling the story. You start with engagement performance, you start the communications, you do review of the work papers of the component auditors. And by the time you get to 45A, it's the standback is, do I really need to do something else besides what we have already performed since the beginning of the audit? And I think that's the piece where we're kind of are getting lost because we're not really making that connection. But definitely, if we just probably tweak, as Julie suggested, not only linking to communications, but actually saying, based on everything that we have done, what else do I need to do? And I like the change from, I think it was like more papers to additional papers. I can't really remember how it was presented. Oh, parts of the documentation with additional, because that is really triggering the stand back requirement, like what else it's needed to complete the audit and to make sure we have the sufficient appropriate audit evidence. But in general terms, I think the flow it's better now. Maybe just trying to simplify a little bit, because at this time, in theory, most of us in practice, we already have all the information needed to support the group opinion. And in probably exceptional cases, we will need to go back and do the revision of these additional work papers. Thanks.
Thank you. Clay Morton.
Thank you. My comment is similar to Isabel and some of the others that just recently spoke. I think that we need to caution when we do the changes lately in the process here, because we're trying to fix a small issue and we may end up complicating it a bit more than necessary for the readers, trying to prove a specific point. So looking at the changes we've done now, I don't disagree specifically with the changes, but I think we do end up with sometimes very long sentences repeating what we have in the requirements, and that we may not. We did a good job following the cost principles, but we need to see whether, similar to what Fernando just said, how we can simplify the application material when we go through this the final round. Thank you.
Toby.
Thanks, Tom. So when I reviewed this, I struggled with the lead into 45A, big A as well. I took some time to raise my hand because I was listening to Len's explanation, and I think I sort of get it a little bit. So I was trying to digest it. But you know, when I was reviewing it, I just didn't. I felt that to say that the decision is based on evaluating adequacy of communication just doesn't sound right. I mean, like Julie, Kumu, and some of the rest said, I actually see it as part of the paragraph 23 decision, which is linked to 220. And I was just wondering whether it makes sense to link it to paragraph 23 instead. Although 23 is about the group engagement partner taking responsibility for. So maybe as part of the requirement in paragraph 23, the group engagement partner shall take responsibility for just determining and so on. So just another take on this and another potential, I guess, solution for the task force to think about. Thanks.
Dan?
Yeah, thanks, Tom, and thanks to all of the board members for your input on this. One kind of going back down memory lane on paragraph 45 and 45A. A while back, the kind of the first sentence of paragraph 45A was actually a part of paragraph 45. So again, without having the benefit of any discussion with the task force, a possible way to address the point raised by Julie and Roger and Chun-Wei and others would be to move back to paragraph 45, the first sentence of 45A. So point C in 45 would be the group auditor determining whether and the extent to which it is necessary to review additional component auditor documentation. And then 45A being focused specifically is in making that determination in paragraph 45C, you consider A, B, and C here. So just wanted to throw that out as a possible alternative construct that might help to address the points raised on that intro wording. But something for the task force to consider, Tom.
Yeah, I rather than have that discussion here at this table, I think the task force should consider it. I don't know how awkward it would be to separate then that sentence with the rest of what exists in 45A, but I think you need to think about it. As I read the comments here is, first of all, support for the direction that you're headed here, that this is a substantial improvement in where we were. I don't view this as a fixing a minor problem. I think this is one of the major substantive issues, public interest issues that we have at the board, to convey that this is incremental on top of all the existing requirements, which is clearly what the task force is doing. So support on that. The concern about the new introductory language on 45A as being unduly limiting, which is part of the problem that Dan was trying to address there. I think that many board members, first expressed by Julian and Kumu on behalf of Imran, stated that point. Then the next issue really is about, is there any way to streamline the complexity with the cross references? Now, I think we should give that a try, but also note that for many, it was really important to have that because that was the way to convey the incremental nature of it. So I think we have some time before the final standards. This is what the task force did under duress in a week's time. The best way to deal with it is to have the great minds of the task force sit together, try to fix it if they can, but maybe it's not. And if not, if people have suggestions, send it to the task force sooner rather than later. And then there were a number of comments throughout in terms of refining application material, which I think could be handled in due course too. Edo.
Yes, thank you, Tom. And yeah, just from my point of view, wanted to thank all the board members for the comments. That's most helpful, and also to stand back and looking at complexity for us. We did spend a bit of time on the lead-in. And we weren't entirely sure that was right. So we'll go work on that. Just wanted to come back to Sashiko on her comment in respect of A52. And just wanted to clarify that in the way we've tried to draft it, that communication from component auditors is audit documentation. So when we speak of A52 and reviews of component auditors' audit documentation, that could be, in certain circumstances, be limited to the communication from the component auditors. And that's how we've tried to write it. So if it's not understood in that way, we'd love to hear from you, such that we can clarify it to mean what we intended.
Thank you. Sachika?
Thank you very much, Edo, about your clarification. why I struggle with this is I think audit documentation means work paper only. That is why I struggle, because communication should include not only the work paper itself, but also other communication as well. But if the intent of the audit documentation in this context include both of them, I'm fine with that. But it's not. But the next question I have is whether that is actually consistent with other terminology we use in the ISA. But maybe that's just about the clarification. But thank you very much for your clarification anyway.
Okay, Len?
Yeah, thank you, Edo, for that, because I was going to come in as well. I think, so without going into detail, I think we don't have paragraph 44 here, but if you look at what we changing 45, it'll be, if you look at all the bullets we had in 44, it's very hard to say those are not audit documentation. So I take Sashika's point. Maybe we should make it very clear. So we'll take it back to the task force. Thank you very much for that. And Isabel, I want to thank you. The reason I'm thanking you is a few months ago you gave us a tobacco paragraph, tobacco section. Today you give us a scavenger section. So until everybody's happy in December, we'll just label that as a scavenger section for 45A. So, but I think Tom, you're right. I think it just we did struggle as a task force in terms of the leading for 45A. I think simply we just running out of time. But the message is pretty clear, and we will take it back in terms of how do we look at 45 and 45A to make it clear. Also, there was also a consistent message about paragraph A52X in terms of maybe some suggestion how we should look at that paragraph and better link to paragraph 31 of 220. And clearly that scavenger hunt message will go back and think about how to make it clear, so people don't have to go through that effort to look for things. But we appreciate you're sensitive to the time and virtual environment. So we'll go back and as a task force and consider those. And Tom, I think that's I think you're right. You summarized clearly. I think the direction is there. People are supportive. The leading 45A and Sashiko's comments, we need to clarify about communication documentation and the streamline the whole section and take another fresh look. And paragraph A52X. So those are the 4 areas I hear from the board.
Roger wants to come back in.
Yeah, just to support Sashiko's view, I realise that in A52 you've changed it to audit documentation. In A51, last bullet point, you've changed working papers to audit documentation. So there is how you're using the word audit documentation is interesting. I thought you'd actually used it in the first place to try and from a technology point of view, to try and get away from working papers, so for the view of papers. So I do think there is a need to clarify how you're using those words.
Okay. Len, back to you to take it to the next step.
I see, hold on 1 second. Next step. I think there's the next step is for the task force. We're meeting in 3 weeks time, but in the process we have a date with IAASB. We have a session planned with the IFIA standards setting working group, and we still have the paragraph I believe it's the paragraph 22 working with the IAASB task force on the independence and ethical requirements. And also in the process, we'll also talk to the IAASB MPC group and the task force meeting coming up. So with that, we'll take all the offline comments. There were a lot of good suggestion comments. As a task force, we'll digest them fully. So thank you for all your time.
Thank you. Any other comments on 600? It's been a really productive week on 600. I think we've gone far to continue to enhance the requirements and associated application material, which is very consistent with the public interest issues that we laid out at the outset of the project. So thank you for all your efforts on this. Thank you for the task force and the and to the staff for all your efforts. Before we close the door on 600, I'll as always invite Karen and Jim to share any reflections that we should take away. Karen?
Thank you very much, Tom. And I want to again say that it's very great work that the task force has undertaken, and the discussion this week on ICE 600 has been very good. I think from a public interest perspective, this last conversation, as well as the previous one on the group auditor's review of the work of the component auditor, has been really helpful. And I look forward to the additional review that the task force undertakes to come to ground on this public interest issue. I appreciated Len's comments that they're going to be meeting next with some stakeholders. And I think that's very important to make sure that they understand where the standard is drafting. So good work for that. And on the effective date, I just want to reiterate that the PAOB would think that it would be in the public interest to allow for early adoption, given the length of time that we've been working on this standard. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Jim Dalkin?
Thanks, Tom. I just wanted to say that thank you to the task force for considering the CAG feedback. I thought you have done that, and I think it was a very good discussion today. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Appreciate those comments. So we're going to bring the meeting to a close. It's been a really valuable week again, as I said, and I'm sad to say that we're in the 7th plenary in a row where we're in a virtual environment. That being said, we're going to try in December to potentially have a hybrid meeting, but that will depend upon the survey results, which have been out, and we'll take those into account. But probably more importantly, the state of the pandemic and travel restrictions into the United States at the time. As you know, the restrictions on many of your home jurisdictions are quite severe still. And so I wish I could say I had full knowledge or control over whether they come off or not. But as they say, that's above my pay grade. But I really appreciate everything that you've done this week. I think we've made a lot of progress on 600. I am confident that we will get approval in December based upon the incorporation of the input. The conforming amendments as a result of QM, I think we're in good place for that for October approval. And the work plan, lots of good feedback on it for the planning committee to consider. And so I think that will be very useful to us. I will be having a discussion about our work plan too with our the PIOB shortly. Karen and Jim, you just commented on 600, which was the preponderance of the substance of this meeting, but not the sole substance. I don't know if you want to add anything else before the meeting concludes. No. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Thanks. No, thank you. Nothing further to add from the other observations. Thank you.
And Jim, same for you.
The same, although I would like to again thank all the task forces for including the CAG comments and considerations.
Okay. Thank you. Huge thank you to the board members and TAs for all you do. Recognize for all of you, it's not your day job, so this is additive. So appreciate everything you do for us and working in this strange but continuing new normal. So appreciate that. You know, we just approved minutes and we're never done with minutes. We'll approve another set of minutes for this meeting in December, so they'll be posted in due course. Actually, the planning committee will be discussing, is there a way that we could think about the minutes more constructively as a public record and possibly be able to turn it more quickly to guide future deliberations. So that's upcoming at a future planning committee. In the third quarter, just a reminder, we have video conferences on October 19th and 20th. The one on October 19th in the morning from the US perspective, morning East Coast time, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. And on October 20th, that's in the late afternoon, our time here, 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. Reminder that if you still have a calendar hold on our November video conferences, those meetings will not occur. We will not be having a meeting in December. By the way, this is, I misspoke, this is quarter four. And then our next IAASB meeting that will be held on December 6 through 10. It'll not be, we have not, as you know, decided whether it's going to be hybrid or virtual entirely, but the meeting timetable won't change. Billy, I wanted you to come in and just explain what our current thinking is. It's all about how do we give adequate time for the approval and consideration of 600. So Billy?
Thank you, Tom. And Tom, I know you probably don't realize this, but I just want to confirm to the board, we will have a meeting in December. We won't have a meeting in November. So,
sorry.
No, that's fine. So just on the October meetings that Tom alluded to, the agenda has actually been posted. So the agenda for the October meetings is on our webpage, on our meetings webpage. There will be 3 items for the agenda. So on Tuesday, October 19, the morning session, we will spend on definition of listed entity and public interest entities. And Wednesday afternoon, we will approve the conforming amendments, and we will look at a piece of non-authoritative support material from the CUSP working group on documentation. So you will remember that was the one, together with the drafting principles and guidelines, that was the other deliverable that we carved out and said, we will see if we can do some non-authoritative guidance on documentation. So that will be that meeting. And then, as Tom has said, for the December meeting, and I can promise the board, we really started out with the intention to see, can we fit everything into just the board week that is scheduled from December 6 to December 10. But, you know, with approval meeting and the turns of the documents that have to take place and the possibility of actually having, you know, full discussion, you sometimes and often need just a touch point for a few specific targeted issues before you have the final turn and approval. It just was impossible to fit it into 1 week. So what I want to ask the board, and we will try to get this agenda to you very soon, is that we don't want to go beyond the normal board week. The board week was scheduled from December 6 to 10. If we go into the next week, we realize we start getting into that week where people start taking leave and going away for the holidays. So what we propose is that we want to start on Thursday, December the 2nd, and have 2 sessions on that Thursday. that will obviously be on ISA 600. And then that gives us a little bit of flexibility in terms of turning documents. There will basically be 3 items on the agenda. The big one is obviously ISA 600 for the approval. We will also have on the agenda fraud and the project proposal for fraud, which will also be approval and would also need a turn during the week. And then the last item that will be on the agenda is the approval of the work plan. And as we explained earlier in the week, there won't be a time for a turn, but we might send you the work plan beforehand for you to provide comments. We will process those comments and then post that version for purposes of the board week. When you see the agenda, and we first need to discuss this just to finalize, but you will see we will actually end up only using 5 days. But the thing is just we can't fit those 5 days into the work week. So you will probably see that the Wednesday within the scheduled week will probably be an open day. But it was just to create that capacity so the task force has time to meet and turn the document that we want to start on Thursday, December the 2nd. Thank you, Tom.
And in the event that we are sort of able to pull off a hybrid meeting, that second meeting on the 2nd will still be virtual under any circumstances. The goal is not to bring you to New York for 2 weeks. But the reality is that even if we were to have a hybrid in-person virtual meeting, some people cannot attend. We need adequate time to turn documents. And we know how much you dislike the frenzy of cramming turns and reading at all different hours of the night. We'd rather give you adequate time for consideration. So that's the thought process. Any questions, comments? I think I'd be remiss if, don't get me wrong, Lily, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, after this meeting, I think Angela Donnelly is a departing team member after this. Yeah, she's going back, finishing her coming up. And you just mentioned fraud as a topic, and I just wanted to put on the public record our appreciation of her contributions to the fraud project. She's worked tirelessly on the fraud project. She did this, I think she started literally at the outset of COVID. And what was nice was last week we got to meet her in person for the first time. But despite not having to work for us, or maybe because she didn't have to work in person with us, she was such a successful contributor. So huge thanks to Angela for all she did for the board. And I think in many ways, she's been a pathfinder for us, trailblazer in terms of the fellows program that will be an active part of our staffing. So with that, I want to bring it to a close. As you know, our papers for future meetings will be posted 7 to 10 days for a video conference, and the likely final posting date for the December plenary will be November 19th. Thank you all for all you do. Have a great weekend. You certainly earned it. Thank you, as always, the staff for keeping us running. And I'll speak to you shortly.